What's up, everybody? FTWitachi here, you know what it is, bringing you another Shadowlands guide, mainly and specifically for Warlocks here, Soulbinding. We have covered in the past Affliction, Destruction, and Demonology Warlock videos that covered talents, gems, enchants, and consumables, rotations, everything that you can see for both PvP and PvE are in those videos. We've also updated you guys with the Warlock legendaries going into Shadowlands, and we have also released the Warlock Covenant guide as well. We got two more I'm hoping to get out to you before Shadowlands gets released. Starting off with this one, which is Soulbinding, which is a new system of progression in Shadowlands expansion, in which players who join a covenant will be able to bind themselves to one of its members or one of the NPCs of that covenant. Sharing some of their power through an artifact type of talent tree. Each of the different covenants has 3 options or NPCs to choose from, with each soulbind offering different bonuses. So each NPC is going to have their totally different talent tree compared to the other one. There will be 3 NPCs or 3 members to go ahead and be able to soulbind with in each covenant. There are 4 different covenants, so that will make it 12 different options to go ahead and choose from, which we will be going over all of them in this video. Conduits also add further customization, and I have yet to speak about that, and that's the other video we will be going over after this one. So stay tuned for the Conduits video, where we will be going over conduits within the soulbinding trees. I'm not going to be talking about them in this video because that's a totally different aspect of the soulbinding and covenants for warlocks in general, and it's a lot more in depth. While in here, we're just basically going to be going over the members, all 3 members from every single covenant, and that's going to give us 12 different options to go ahead and look into, and I'm going to go ahead and let you know which is best for each covenant in order. So without further ado, alrighty, so here we are at the Soulbind calculator at wowhead.com. We're going to be going over each and every single member. Again, there's 3 members for each and every single covenant. I strongly suggest you check out our covenant video, our covenant guide for warlocks, which goes over demonology, destruction, and affliction warlocks all in one video. And it explains which covenant you should basically delve your character into to maximize your character's potential, especially spec specific. And for example, affliction warlocks are going to be going into Corrine. Destruction warlocks are also going to be going into Corrine, and demonology warlocks will have benefits from the Necrolord. But don't worry, if you decide that you want to go ahead and play into Venthyr or Night Fae, we'll also be going over those members as well, and I'll be explaining to you which ones you, members from those covenants you should choose to soulbind your character with. But without further ado, we're going to go ahead and start off with Corrine. So if you do follow our covenant guide for warlocks, destruction and affliction warlocks are going to want to go ahead and focus on this portion of the video, which is the Corrine covenant. And the first member we're going to be going over is Pelagos. And actually, we're going to be going in order from best member to worst member. And we're going to be starting off with Pelagos, who is in fact going to give you the most potential from this Corrine covenant. So without further ado, let's get to it. Starting off with the first row, you got Combat Meditation. I'm going to be reading and going over every single ability so you guys can get a little bit more in depth on what we're talking about here. Activating your Corrine class ability increases your mastery by 350 for 10 seconds and occasionally expels sorrowful memories. Walking through sorrowful memories extends its effect by 3 seconds. So you really have no other option except for choosing Combat Meditation in the first row, so go ahead and select that. Next up, you're going to notice there's 3 blank circles that require 3 conduits added to the Forge of Bonds to go ahead and move to the 3rd row. Each talent tree is different from every single member, just giving you all a heads up. The one that looks like 2 daggers going through each other or 2 swords on the left, that is called a potency conduit, and those conduits usually increase your DPS or buff up a specific ability for damage. The next one, which looks like a shield, is called an endurance conduit, and those conduits are more defensive and healing oriented. And last but not least, the thunderbolt on the right is a finesse conduit. Those are kind of like unique abilities. For example, one of the conduits that are under there is called Kilrog's Cunning. Now, we're going to be going over these conduits in a different video. So we're going to be skipping these rows, but I am going to be selecting basically the correct order that you should be going with when it comes to each and every single talent set, just to give you all a heads up. But Kilrog's Cunning, that finesse Soulbind conduit I was talking to you about, it basically does something like this. Your Eye of Kilrog is no longer stealth and can now place your demonic circle. The casting Warlock must be within line of sight of the Eye of Kilrog to place that demonic circle. So it's stuff like that. But without further ado, let's get back into this. We're going to start off by choosing the damage one on the far left. Moving on to the third row. You got Focusing Mantra. Defeating an enemy lowers the cooldown of your File of Serenity by 1 second. Road of Trials. Defeating an enemy grants you 10% movement speed for 20 seconds. This effect is increased if defeating a powerful enemy. File of Patience. File of Serenity heals you for 35% additional health, but all of its healing is done over 10 seconds. Now, out of these three options, I am going to be selecting Focusing Mantra. And the reason being is I want to go ahead and utilize the Potency Conduits option. These conduits are actually the main key role to when going through these talents. So yes, Focusing Mantra out of these three might not be the most appealing and might not be the most beneficial. But when you're going into damaging, and we'll be going over the conduits in another video, you're going to want to go ahead and choose Focusing Mantra because of this Potency Conduit option that is currently blank for us right here. Now, on the next one, we have an Endurance Conduit we're forced to go ahead and select. Now we have two options. Cleansed Vestments. You have a chance to obtain Cleansed Cloth and Enchanting Materials when you kill an enemy that yields experience or honor. And then Bond of Friendship. Defeating an enemy reduces the cooldown on your steward's non-file services by 30 seconds. You have an option of either or in this tier, so just giving you all a heads up on that, but I will go ahead and be choosing Cleansed Vestments. Next up, you got a Potency Conduit, which is exactly what we're looking for, so we're going to go ahead and select that. Next up on this next tier, you got a Endurance or a Finesse Conduit. If you are looking for something a little bit more finesse, a little bit more unique, go ahead and select that conduit. And then if you're looking for something a little bit more defensive or healing oriented, go ahead and select that one. But I'm going to go ahead, just for the fun, go ahead and select the Finesse Conduit. And that will go ahead and end us off with Let Go of the Past. Using a spell or ability increases your versatility by 1% for 6 seconds. Using another spell or ability increases this amount by 1% when it's not a repeat of the previous spell or ability, stacking to 3%. And that will fill up your talent tree for the Kyrian option of Pelagos. Overall, it's going to be 1, 1, 1, 1, 2, 1, 2, and 1. Next up, we're going to be moving on to Clea. Now with Clea, you got Valiant Strikes as your first option. You and your nearby party members' critical strikes grant you stacks of Valiant Strikes, up to 40. If a nearby party member drops below 50% health, you consume these stacks to heal them for 1% of their maximum health per stack. Next up, you have a choice of a Potency Conduit or a Endurance Conduit. We're going to go ahead and hit it up with the Potency. Next up, you've got either Mentorship. While above 90% health, you increase nearby party members' maximum health by 5%. Or Ascended File if you went with the Endurance Conduit. File of Serenity renders you immune to curse, disease, poison, and bleed effects by 8 seconds. But because we went with the Potency Conduit, we're going to be forced into Mentorship, and I prefer that option anyways. Next up, we're going to go ahead and choose a Finesse Conduit option choice because it is our only option. Next up, Cleansing Rites. After 5 seconds out of combat, gain a shield for 10% of your maximum health. Or, ever forward, while above 90% health, your mounted movement speed is increased by 10%. And for this option, I went with Cleansing Rites. But again, go ahead and choose whichever one you see beneficial to your character. They both don't really help DPS-wise either way. Next up, we've got an Endurance Conduit choice. And the next option we're going to go ahead and choose here is the Potency Conduit. Leading us with Bear's Pursuit. Your damaging spells and abilities have a chance to decrease your target's movement speed by 45%, which is kind of nice for PvP. If you did choose the Endurance Conduit, Pointed Courage. Chance to crit is increased by 1% for every nearby enemy or ally, up to 8%. And last but not least, the Finesse option was Resonant Accolades. When receiving healing while above 70% health or increasing an ally that's above 70% health, 4% of its healing done is repeated on the target over 5 seconds. just to give you all a heads up, this is a full tree of 1s on the full left-hand side. And again, this is a unique member because it doesn't really help damage-wise if you've noticed on all of its or all of her abilities that you can go ahead and Soulbind with. It's kind of like a healing member from the Kyrian, which is why Pelagos is above Clea. But now we've got Forge Light, which was my third and least favorite option in the Kyrian, so let's go ahead and get into that one. Next up, we got Forge Light, the last of the Kyrian. Bronze call to action. After using 90 damaging or healing spells and abilities, your next spell or ability summons Brawn, who knocks enemies back on arrival and then attacks and heals your targets for 30 seconds. It's actually a really, really strong ability, but using 90 damaging or healing spells, I mean, it's kind of not too difficult in PvP, but it's kind of not the best in PvP, which is why I prefer Clea for PvP options, which is why I put Forge Light onto the bottom. Pelagos for sure for PvE options and PvP options. Clea if you want to be more on the defensive side of things. And Forge Light, it's just difficult to run with, but overall it could be a little bit better than Clea. They're both very, very similar in their roles that they play. Next up, we're going to be picking up a Potency Conduit, leading us to Forge Light Filter. When reduced before 35% health, your Phial of Serenity automatically heals you and consumes a charge. Or if you went with the Defensive Conduit, Charged Additive, Phial of Serenity also knocks nearby enemies away from you. We're now forced into complete Finesse. And next up, we've got Regenerating Materials, which is casting or receiving healing, has a chance to improve the remaining durability of your armor. And Resilient Plumage, fall damage decreased by 20%, and after taking fall damage, damage you take is reduced by 20% for 15 seconds. So I went with Regenerating Materials, but either or is a fine option. Another Defensive Conduit, leading us into, I took the Defensive Conduit over the Potency on this one, due to the final ability. You get Soul Steel Clamps after 5 seconds of standing still, which is kind of not really nice to be forced to do. Incoming stun and incapacitating damages or durations are reduced by 30%. Lasts for 5 seconds once you start moving. Hammer of Genesis, damaging a new enemy, grants you 3% haste for 10 seconds up to 5 stacks. That was just way too hard to pass up, comparing it to a damaging Potency Conduit. And if you chose the Finesse route, Sparkling Drift Globe Core. When reduced below 35% health, you stun nearby enemies for 3 seconds. This effect may only occur once every 45 seconds. So for this last option of Forge Light, we went 1-1, 1-1, 1-1, 2, and 2. And in that order, that gives us all of our Kyrian NPCs or Kyrian members. Again, for both Destruction and Affliction Warlocks, if you do follow our Covenant guide, you will most likely be going into the Kyrian Covenant. I strongly suggest you Soulbind with Pelagos. Clea and Forge Light are not the greatest, and they defeat the purpose as well going into the Kyrian Covenant for a Warlock. Pelagos is just a DPS increase overall, especially due to the amount of potency conduits you can go ahead and slot in with Pelagos, and of course his talents are not too bad as well. But again, Destruction and Affliction Warlocks, you're going to want to go ahead and team yourselves up with the NPC of Pelagos when you go ahead and go into the Kyrian Covenant. Next up, we're going to be covering the Necro Lords, and this is mainly aimed for Demonology Warlocks. So without further ado, let's get to it. Now into the 3 NPCs that reside with the Necro Lord. My favorite option is Emini. A weird looking abomination, isn't he? But we've got Emini, so let's go ahead and get to it. Lead by example. Activating your Necrolord class ability increases your primary stat by 5% and nearby allies' primary stat by 2% for 10 seconds. You gain 5% additional of that primary stat for each ally affected up to 15%, which is absolutely bangers. Absolutely bangers. And what's even nicer about this is when it comes to Emini, you get a Potency Conduit right off the bat as well, leading us into Emini's Magnificent Skin. Fleshcraft increases your maximum health by 5% for 30 seconds. But if you did go the Defensive Conduit route, Emini's Ambulatory Flesh, you may channel Fleshcraft while moving. And I'd rather have the Magnificent Skin option. You got a Finesse Conduit choice here. Next up, leading us into the legs after taking fall damage. The health loss becomes a shield lasting 30 seconds. Or a Hearth Kidney Stone. You may attune your Hearth Kidney Stone to any resting location and return to it. 12-hour cooldown reduced by 5 minutes every killing blow. And you know what? You know what, fam? Imagine being a little cute freaking furry. You can make your camp anywhere you want, anywhere you go. You've also got a freaking Hearthstone. And now you get a Hearth Kidney Stone. Let's freaking go. Why not? Choose any of the two options, though. They don't really affect you either way. They're very, very flavorful abilities. Defensive Conduit of choice. Next up, we go ahead and select with Emini. We're going to go ahead and select another defensive conduit. The reason being is, again, for its third option, or the final option, if you were to go ahead and choose the Potency Conduit, you got Gristled Toes, movement speed increased by 3% for every nearby enemy, up to 50%. You got Gnashing Chompers, gain 3% haste for 10 seconds after defeating an enemy, up to 15%, so it keeps stacking up to 15%, and that is kind of hard to pass up, comparing that to a Potency Conduit. And last but not least, the Finesse Conduit's option was Sulfuric Emission. When reduced below 20% health, you fear nearby enemies for 4.5 seconds, may only occur once per 60 seconds. Let's move on to my boy Plague Divisor, Miralev. Next up, we got the Plague Divisor, Miralev, starting off with Volatile Solvent. Use Fleshcraft with nearby corpses, consumes their essence completely, granting a beneficial ability based on the creature's typing. Next up, we go ahead and select one of the conduit choices, which in my case, I went with the flavorful, unique Finesse Conduit choice out of these options. If you did go Potency, you got Ooze's Frictionless Coating. When reduced below 50% health, Ooze courses over you, granting you a shield for 50% of your maximum health. For 10 seconds, may only occur once per 30 seconds. Travel with Bloop. While standing still, you slowly build stacks of Bloop's Wonderless. At 5 stacks, your movement speed is increased by 10% for 2 minutes. And last but not least, Plague's Preemptive Strike. Your first strike or spell cast on an enemy increases your damage done to them by 10% for 10 seconds, limit to 1. Next up, you get a defensive conduit that you have to go ahead and throw on there. Next up, we got two options here with Miralev. You've got either Kevin's Keyring, allow opening of locks that require up to 60 skill once every 12 hours. Each 1 second spent channeling Fleshcraft reduces Kevin's Keyring cooldown by 60 minutes. Plagueborn Cleansing Slime, approximately 1 proc per minute. Defeating enemies has a chance to deploy your Plagueborn Cleansing Slime, which improves the remaining durability on your armor, which is the option I went with, but again, either or will do. You get a Potency Conduit, which is what you want to see. And last but not least, with the conduit choices for Miralev, I went with the second option, which is the Finesse option. But no matter what you would choose, you would be getting into Ultimate Form. While channeling Fleshcraft, you are immune to crowd control, and you regenerate 2% health every 1 second. If you finish the full channel, you gain 4 seconds of crowd control immunity, during which you regenerate 2% health every 1 second as well. Finishing off Miralev as my second favorite NPC and member of the Necrolord, leaving us last but not least with Bonesmith. With Bonesmith's ability, Forgeborn Reveries, upon death your armor continues to fight, allowing you to fight for an additional 10 seconds. During this time, your damage and healing done is reduced by 50% and you cannot receive healing. Leading us to a Potency Conduit, we go ahead and Resourceful Fleshcrafting, defeating an enemy reduces Fleshcraft's cooldown by 1 second, or if you went defensive, go ahead and Serrated Spalders, inflict shadow damage to your attacker over 5 seconds when hit at melee range. Leading us to a Finesse Conduit. You can go ahead and choose either or. Again, very, very unique abilities, so go ahead and choose whichever one you want to play with. Runeforged Spurs. Mounted movement speed is increased by 5%. If attacked while mounted, mounted movement speed is increased by an additional 10% for 30 seconds. Or Bonesmith's Satchel. You have a chance to obtain a satchel of Bonesmith's preferred ore or gems when you kill an enemy that yields experience or honor, which is what I selected. Defensive Conduit into another defensive conduit. Himmer's Arsenal, Gore Stompers, if you went with the Potency DPS conduit. Damaging or healing a target below 35%, grants you 35% increased movement speed for 5 seconds after you start moving, may only occur once per 1 minute. You then have the option of Himmer's Arsenal Mode Gemstone. After landing 10 crits, you gain 18% increased chance to crit for 10 seconds, may only occur once per 60 seconds. Last but not least, Hermer's Arsenal Revenous Pendant. Defeating an enemy restores 3% of the maximum health every 6 seconds for 6 seconds, stacking up to 5 times, adding stacks refreshes duration. I went with defensive capabilities, which put me there, which landed me there at the very, very bottom with Hermer's Arsenal Marrowed Gemstone. Just to give you all a heads up, in that order, in the Necrolord, we went with Emini, we went with Miralev, and then we last but not least finished with Bonesmith. That is the order with the members that you want to go ahead and choose. So if you are a Demonology Warlock going into the Necrolord Covenant, go ahead and select Emini as your member of choice. Next up is the Venthyr. So this is one of the 2 covenants that I did not put at the top for Demonology, Destruction, or Affliction. But again, I also state in that video, it is up to you to go ahead and select a covenant of your choice, and I explain why on that as well. So if you did end up choosing Venthyr, here are your options. Starting off with Naya as the best option of the 3. Starting off with Thrillseeker. While in combat, you gain a stack of Thrillseeker every 2 seconds or 4 stacks on killing an enemy. At 40 stacks, Thrillseeker is consumed to grant you Euphoria, increasing your haste by 20% for 10 seconds. Thrillseeker decays rapidly while you are not in combat. Next up, we go ahead and select the Potency Conduit, of course, for DPS increase. Agent of Chaos, Door of Shadows disorients all nearby enemies at the target location for 6 seconds when you appear. Or if you went with the Defensive Conduit, you got Fancy Footwork, Door of the Shadows increases your movement speed by 40%, decaying over 6 seconds. Next up, Finesse. Next up, you got Friends in Low Places. You loot 20% more infused rubies, and Dredgers throughout Ravendreth offer you an expanded selection of goods. Next up, a Defensive Conduit. And last but not least, with Naya, I went ahead and selected the Defensive Conduit again. But if you did go Potency, you got Familiar Predicaments. The duration of incoming interrupt, snare, and root effects are reduced by 25%. Exacting Preparation. The benefits of well-fed flasks and weapon enchants effects are increased by 20%, which is really, really strong. And if you want Finesse, you got Dauntless Duelist. The first enemy you damage in combat is marked as your adversary. Deal 3% more damage to them, and they deal 1.5% less damage to you. You may only have one adversary at a time. Next up, we got Theotar, the Mad Freaking Duke, who is the second best option for the Venthyr, starting off with Soothing Shade. Your spells and abilities have a chance to call Tubbins and Gubbins to your side for 12 seconds. Parasol in hand, standing in the shaded area grants you 525 mastery. Next up for this option with Theotar, we went with a Defensive Conduit, which gave us the option for Watch the Shoes. Door of Shadows frees you from roots and snares. If you went with Finesse, you got Leisurely Gait. Door of Shadows has 2 charges, but its cooldown is also now increased by 30 seconds, leaving us with a Potency DPS increased Conduit. Either Life of the Party or Exquisite Ingredients, choose either or. During the Ember Court, your guests gain additional happiness for each event completed. When the court concludes, the effects of any decrease bestowed upon you are increased. Now you got Exquisite Ingredients. You have a chance to obtain an assortment of flavorful herbs and beverages when you kill an enemy that yields experience of honor, which is the option I went with. Defensive Conduit. And last but not least, with my boy Theotar, we went ahead and selected the Finesse option. If you chose Potency, Token of Appreciation, grant a shield that absorbs damage to allies who aid you with healing or beneficial magic effects. You will only shield each ally once every 20 seconds. Refined Palette, the effects of combat potions last 100% to 200% longer. And last but not least, Wasteland Proprietary. We got Activating your Venthyr class ability signals the start of tea time, granting 6% versatility to you and 3% versatility up to 4 nearby enemies last 10 seconds, which is going to be the talent tree for Theotar, leading us to the last option in the Venthyr, General Draven. Starting off with General Draven's first option, Service in Stone. Damage taken below 40% health is reduced by 10%. Upon death, you leave a stone husk behind, which shatters after 3 seconds, inflicting 100% of the maximum health in damage split among nearby enemies, and healing for 100% of your maximum health split among nearby allies. With this option, we're going to go ahead and be selecting the Finesse over the Endurance Conduit. But if you did do Endurance, you got Move as 1. When a nearby ally gains temporary increased movement speed, you also gain the benefit of up to 30% for 8 seconds. We're going to be getting the Enduring Gloom. Door of Shadows grants you a shield that absorbs damage equal to 50% of maximum health, lasts 8 seconds. Potency Conduit. Choose either Unbreakable Body or Expedition Leader. Leaving a rested area increases your mounted speed by 10% and your out of combat regeneration by 100%, lasts 10 minutes. And completing a world quest refreshes the duration. Unbreakable Body, your equipment takes 50% less durability damage upon death, which is the option I chose. Endurance, and last but not least for my boy Draven, we went with the finesse option again. However, if you chose potency, hold your ground, standing still for at least 4 seconds, grants you 10% increased stamina and 4% increased healing done. This effect persists to 6 seconds after you start moving. Superior tactics, if you chose endurance conduit, successfully interrupting an enemy or dispelling an ally increases your crit chance by 10% for 10 seconds, only occur once every 30 seconds. We got Built for War. While you're above 80% health and gain 1% of your primary stat every 3 seconds, stacking up to 4 times. If you fall below 50% health, this effect is lost. With that being said, in that order again for Venthyr, you got Naya. Number 2, you got Theotar, and the third option of my and with that being said, for the Venthyr, the best option of choice was Naya, second best was Theotar, and last but not least, you had General Draven, leading us into the final covenant for Soulbinds, which is going to be the Night Fae. So let's go ahead and get into these 3 final options. Starting off with Corrine for the Night Fae, my favorite option. Wild Hunt Tactics. Your damage to targets above 75% health and healing to targets below 35% health is increased by 10%. When your spells and abilities are enhanced this way, you gain 50% increased movement speed for 5 seconds. Next up, you've got a Potency Conduit, DPS increase. Gives us the option of Horn of the Wild Hunt. Soul Shape increases the movement speed of allies within 40 yards by 10%. Or, if you went defensive, you got Wild Hunt's Charge. While out of combat, your Soul Shapes teleport because of Charge, stunning your target for 5 seconds and ending your Soul Shape. Next up, you got a Finesse Conduit, leading to either Vorkai Sharpening Techniques, your weapons take no durability damage, or get in formation. Your mounted movement speed is increased by 5%. Allies behind you within 40 yards also gain this benefit, which is the option I chose, leading us to a defensive conduit. And last but not least, we went with the Potency Conduit for a DPS increase with Face Your Foes. When in front of your target, your spells and abilities decrease the damage they inflict on you by 3% for 2 seconds. If you went defensive, for a strike, damaging an enemy before they damage you increases the chance to crit by 25% for 5 seconds. And if you went finesse, hold the line. After standing still for 5 seconds, you take 15% less physical damage until you move. Leading us into Naya, the second best option in the Night Fae. Grove Invigoration. Healing or dealing damage has a chance to grant you a stack of Redirected Anima. Redirected Anima increases your maximum health by 1% and your mastery by 25 for 30 seconds, and stacks do overlap. Let's go ahead and select that, leading us into Naya's Potency, which is a DPS increase. Run without tiring. While in Soul Shape, you regenerate 5% of your maximum health every 3 seconds. Or if you went defensive, you got Stand and Move. Soul Shape's cooldown is reduced by 15 seconds, and defeating an enemy reduces Soul Shape's cooldown by 1 second. Finesse option. Choose either Nature's Splendor. You have a chance to obtain leather, meat, and fish when you kill an enemy that yields experience or honor. Or Swift Patrol. Movement speed increased by 20% for 2 minutes after defeating an enemy. Combat cancels this effect. I went with Nature's Splendor. Defensive Conduit. Leading us into, last but not least, which option did I go ahead and choose for Naya, actually? We went all the way on to the left-hand side. So yes, we did go with the Defensive Conduit on this one, giving us Naya's tools and burrs. Your damaging attacks and spells have a chance to toss Naya's spiked burrs under your target. The burrs latch on to the first enemy to cross them, reducing movement speed by 20% and inflicting nature damage over 6 seconds. If you went Potency, Naya's tools Poison, your interrupt apply Naya's paralytic poison to your target, dealing nature damage over 30 seconds. Targets with Naya's paralytic poison take an additional nature damage if interrupts more than once. If you want Finesse, Naya's tools, herbs, your healing spells and abilities have a chance to apply Naya's invigorating herbs, increasing the target's haste by 5% for 10 seconds. Last option, Dreamweaver. And what sucks is Dreamweaver is my favorite of the 3 members of the Night Fae, but sadly it is the worst when it comes to options and choices. Starting off with Pod Tender. When you take damage that would kill you, instead rejuvenate within a Wild Seed, regaining 30% of HP over 10 seconds. If the Wild Seed takes more than a specific amount of damage during that time, you will go ahead and die. This effect may only occur once every 10 minutes, leading us to a defensive conduit, leading us to a potency conduit, then leading us into the second option. But first we're going to go ahead and go over Soothing Voices. When your roots, stuns, and incapacitating class effects expire or are dispelled, your target's movement speed is reduced by 90%, decaying rapidly over 2 seconds. Social Butterfly, which is the option I went with. When at least 2 allies are within 8 yards, your versatility increases by 3% for 5 seconds. When this expires, 2 nearby allies gain 33% of this effect for 5 seconds before passing it back to you. And last but not least, Empowered Chrysalis. 10% of your overhealing received or done remains as a shield on the target up to 10% of the caster's health, lasting for 5 seconds, giving us into the defensive conduit, leading us into another defensive conduit, and finishing us off with the second option. I went with Somnambulist, but let's go ahead and go over Fairy Dust. When falling further than 20 yards, Fairy Dust slows your fall for the next 30 seconds. This cannot occur more than once per minute. I went with, after spending 60 seconds in a rested area, you gain 20% increased movement speed for 30 minutes, leading us to Field of Blossoms, which is the last and final ability. Activating your Night Fae class ability puts flowers at your feet for 15 seconds that increases your haste by 12% while you stand with them. Again, this is all the information before Shadowlands even gets released. Some of these options, you would always want to try to go with the path that is going to give you a potency conduit, because those are always going to increase your damage. But due to some of the percentages in some of the actual Soulbind abilities from these members of the Covenants, I have had, or been kind of forced to navigate myself into a either a finesse or endurance option of a conduit, which is usually what you don't want to do. You always want to go with potency conduit option choices or the potency conduit path. But again, some of these abilities are a little bit stronger than the potency conduit, so I went with either an endurance or a finesse conduit choice. Again, we're going to be going over all 3 of these conduit options in another video. And these conduits are also going to be going into these slots, which is going to make a little bit more sense once you combine both of these videos together. But again, for the Kyrian, we had Pelagos at number 1, Clea at number 2, and Forgelight at number 3, which is both, again, for Destruction and Affliction Warlocks. For Demonology Warlocks and the Necrolord, we had Emini at number 1, we had Miralev at number 2, and Bonesmith at number 3. And then last but not least, the last 2 Covenants, Venthyr, we had Naya, Theotar, and Draven at number 3. And last but not least, for the Night Fae, we had Corrine, Naya, and then Dreamweaver at number 3. If you have any questions, go ahead and post in the comment section down below. I'll be sure to answer as soon as possible. I'm very positive there's going to be some more changes, because there has been changes almost every single week to our class as a Warlock, Covenant abilities, legendary abilities, conduits, you name it. Some of them haven't been too overwhelming to where the options don't really change, but again, the options can change, and I will go ahead and update and create a brand new video to you guys as quickly as I possibly can, so stay tuned on the channel. But again, if you have any questions, post in the comment section down below. I'll be sure to answer as soon as possible. Catch you all next time. Peace out, everybody.